Nearly 2 years ago, I was contacted by a collector. He had an idea of a painting that would show the way the Mona Lisa looked when it was newly finished at the beginning of the 16th century. He wanted it to be bright, he wanted it to be beautiful, he wanted it to have the lively look of a woman in her early to mid-20s. This is a painting that was commissioned of a woman who was probably somewhere between 23 and 26 years old. The way the painting appears now in the Louvre, it looks like she may be nearing 40 and is of a very pale complexion. We know from accounts that were written within 50 years of the painting being finished that she had a very different countenance at that time. One of the primary problems with the image now is the varnish. The varnish has darkened with age. It is impossible to clean it at this point because it has melded with the paint surface. The surface has many cracks all over it. This is partially due to the fact that it's on a poplar panel. The wood takes on humidity and then swells with that humidity, contracts in drier weather. So all that movement within the panel is constantly putting a stress on the paint film and has broken it all over the surface of this painting. That's not unusual. There's been more damage also from the fact that Leonardo was an experimenter. He was an innovator, and he was trying a lot of different things. But in his experiments, he broke one of the cardinal rules of painting in oil. In painting in oil, you always put fat over lean. That means that the oilier layers have to go over layers that have more pigment, and less oil. If you paint lean over fat, you run into problems because the fat layer underneath, the layer of paint that has more oil in it, is slower to dry. When the layer on top of it cracks, it cracks through everything. It precipitates a crack down into the layers of paint. So that apparently has happened in many areas here. The varnish is also a problem because it has been apparently, we know it has been removed in certain areas in abrasive cleanings, overzealous cleanings. These happen very early in the life of the painting. We know that from the late 1700s on, it had excellent care and it is in fairly good condition. But the early problems were in cleaning. This belonged to the King of France at that time, and it is known that he had his entire collection washed. They called it washing it at regular intervals. So in those abrasive cleanings, the surface had lost some of its integrity, the surface of the paint. We are aware that this happened because in the original you can see areas which are very clearly rubbed off. Leonardo painted this in transparent layers over an underpainting that was primarily a monochromatic underpainting. That was the usual procedure for working at that time. The layers, however, are very thin. They're very subtle, and those came right up with the varnish in those early washings. Another problem with the look of the painting is the fact that some of the pigments that were used were fugitive, meaning that they fade very quickly. Primarily, in the skin tone, this is visible. The reds, in particular, were made from the bodies and secretions of an insect, and they fade very quickly. In some paintings, they have managed to hold their color. In many, they did not. And the fact that he was working with such thin glazes made them more vulnerable. The early accounts of this painting mention the lively skin tones that were colors but not colors because they really looked like flesh. They were so subtle that in her neck it mentions that it looks as if you can see her pulse throbbing through a vein. And in fact, there are traces of blue pigments, azurite pigments in this area of the painting. But at this point, they are so degraded and there's so little left that we can't see much of it. But the painting was very lively at that time. Giorgio Vasari, an art historian of that time, refers to the red of the lips, the rosiness, the tender rosiness around the nostrils. And he also refers to the lights in the eyes, the highlights that have the luster of the liquid quality of eyes, which is a very rare and beautifully accomplished thing that Leonardo did. However, none of that is visible now in this painting. I have put the sparkle back in the eyes. I have given her more color. And among the other changes are the fact that much of the detail here is completely covered by the darkened varnish. There are a lot of transparencies. Lisa's husband was a dealer in fabrics, silk especially, and these fine gauzes, this gauze veil over her head was an article of luxury. You notice that she's wrapped in gauze, this silkiness, and the colors are vibrant. The dress is green, the sleeves are red. The color now looks as if she might be a woman in mourning wearing black. But that certainly was not the case when the painting was new. Her hair, which looks nearly black in the current state of the painting, was found to be a chestnut brown. All this information is from studies done at the Louvre by the French government in the year 2004. These researches were supplied to me by the collector in a wonderful book that documents all of their findings. And we know now that her hair was of a fine texture, that it was a lighter color. And that affects my idea, too, of the fact that now the Mona Lisa has virtually no eyebrows. That contributes a lot to the mystery of her expression. So I did not want to change that very much, but I have indicated fine eyebrows here. Looking at the fact that her hair was of a fine texture, that it was of a lighter color, makes me think that from knowing people that I see today, sometimes when that coloring is present, there are scanty eyebrows, either very light in color or very fine hairs. The subtlety of those eyebrows is described by Vasari, but for me to go much beyond this, I felt might misrepresent what Leonardo had intended to do. There are some other changes that were brought to my attention by news in the last few years of a painting in the collection of the Prado. It is a copy of this painting, but it was made at the time that Leonardo did this painting. It apparently documents what Leonardo painted. It is clearly based on this composition. The background was painted one dark color in that copy. Recently, it was cleaned, and they found underneath that one dark color was an approximation of the landscape that we see in Leonardo's painting. So that gives us an idea that this is an accurate representation. There are some things about it which I think are probably not exactly what Leonardo did, but there are some things that were a big help to me. In the original painting that's in the Louvre, you can see right at the top of the bodice, there are mysterious dark traces of paint on Lisa's chest. And it's unexplained. Why are they there? They make no sense. It's not exactly like something that would have been there if it were not the remains of something that has been removed. I have indicated here a delicate white trim in kind of a rickrack pattern. And I chose to do that. Something very similar is indicated in the Prado copy. And that makes perfect sense in my own mind that is what caused those remnants of paint that we see today. The sleeves also are much brighter than this in that copy. I have the feeling that the color is not true, but in fact, red would have been an appropriate color for this ensemble. So I chose to go with the red. Right now, in the Louvre, the sleeves appear to be sort of a muddy bronze color, which I think is probably the underpainting. The colored glazes in which Leonardo accomplished virtually all of this painting have probably faded. I imagine that this was done in one of those reds that was fugitive. The background is much more colorful. According to the French studies, the blues, browns, and greens were the things that were most affected by the darkening of the varnish and by the changes in chemistry. So I believe, and looking at other paintings of Leonardo's that are much brighter and other Renaissance paintings of that time, that we can assume that this blue was much more in evidence. The blue, the chemicals of the blue, he used lapis lazuli, but he also used azurite. Azurite is a pigment that is much less expensive than the lapis. So lapis would have been almost as expensive as a jewel would have been at that time. The colors here are closer, I believe, to what Leonardo painted. The French studies could identify chemically by the spectrograph equivalents that there's a lot of copper in this dress. Although it appears to be a brownish, blackish color now, the predominance of copper here indicates that it was a green. We're not exactly sure of the precise hue, but it was green. And there's been a lot of speculation because of the darkening of the varnish that the woman has her hair down, that the sitter is wearing her hair all loose, which would have been kind of a shocking thing because at that time that was a sign of a woman of easy virtue, or only very young girls or a woman of ill repute would wear her hair in that way. But in looking at other Renaissance paintings, there are examples where the hair is parted in the middle, pulled, slicked back, and there are two locks, one at either side of the face, that are curled and hang down. You see back here, there is an indication of a bonnet. It was the style to wear the hair pulled up and covered in a bonnet. So that would have been secured to her head, and the veil would have gone over the whole thing. This drapery over the shoulder is probably like a shawl that she pulled up over her shoulder to expose her hands. The detail below, the shape of the chair, the indication of the drapery over her lap, are virtually impossible to detect with the naked eye now because of the darkening of the paint and varnish. But the Louvre study also shows underpaintings through, I don't understand all the technology of it, but through their technology, they can bring up what different layers of the paint show us. And you can see what is part of an underdrawing and what is part of a finished painting.